Zoe, and this is the story of how my husband and my younger sister almost destroyed me, and how I made sure they left with nothing. It started with a receipt, a small thing, the kind of thing you'd normally throw away without a second thought. My sister had been staying with us for 3 weeks. She'd just gone through a breakup, she said, and needed somewhere to land. My husband, I'll call him my husband because that's what he still was. He was the one who suggested it. She's family, he said. We have the room. I remember thinking how sweet that was. How lucky I was to have a man who cared so much about my family. The receipt was from a restaurant I'd never been to. A nice one. 47 miles from our house. I found it in the pocket of his jacket when I was bringing his dry cleaning upstairs. Dinner for 2. A bottle of wine I recognized. It was the same wine he'd ordered the night he proposed to me. I stood in our hallway holding that little piece of paper for a long time. I told myself there was an explanation. Work dinner. Client. Someone from his firm. I set the receipt on his nightstand and waited to see if he'd mention it. He never did. That was the first thing. The second thing happened 4 days later. I came home early from a conference. The keynote ran short. Flights got reshuffled. I was back by 2 in the afternoon instead of 7 at night. The house was quiet. My sister's car was in the driveway. My husband's car was in the driveway. I thought they were both home. Maybe watching TV. Maybe she'd made lunch. I walked in through the side door the way I always do, dropped my bag in the laundry room, and walked into the kitchen. The coffee mugs were still on the counter. 2 of them. One had my sister's lipstick on the rim, the dark berry color she always wore. I heard them upstairs before I saw anything. Just their voices, low and close together. The sound of someone moving quickly, a door closing. By the time my sister appeared at the top of the stairs, she was fully dressed and smiling like nothing in the world was wrong. You're home early, she said. Flight change, I said. My husband appeared behind her a second later. He looked composed. He always looked composed. It was one of the things I had once loved about him. That steadiness, that control. Now I understood it differently. Hey, babe, he said. We were just going over some stuff for your birthday. Don't ask questions. I didn't ask questions. I smiled. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water and stood at the sink and stared out the window at our backyard for a long time. I was 29 years old. We had been married for 3 years. My sister was 26, and I had spent my entire life protecting her. I did not cry. I didn't have the energy for it yet. That night I lay in bed next to my husband and I thought about everything I knew. The receipt. The lipstick on the mug. The way they had looked at the top of the stairs. The birthday excuse. Offered so quickly, so cleanly, like something that had been prepared in advance. I thought about the last 6 months, how distracted he'd seemed, how many times he'd stayed late at work, how my sister had started texting me less, just enough to not raise flags, but less, in a way I hadn't consciously registered until right now. I thought about the joint savings account. The house we bought 2 years ago, both our names on the deed, the small investment account I'd built on my own before we got married. The one I'd kept separate because my mother told me to. Because she said, you never know, Zoe. You never know. I was glad I had listened. I didn't say a word to either of them. I decided right then that silence was the only weapon worth having. The next morning I called a lawyer. Not a divorce lawyer, not yet. A financial attorney. A woman named Patricia who had been recommended by a colleague. I told her I needed to understand exactly what was mine and what could be contested if a marriage ended. I told her I wasn't sure yet. I just needed to understand the landscape. She walked me through everything. The joint account, the house, the investment account, what was protected and what wasn't. She explained what a trust could do. She explained timelines and documentation and what the word separate property meant in real terms. By the end of that call, I had a plan. I moved quietly. Methodically, over the next 10 days, I transferred the contents of my personal investment account into a trust in my name only. I opened a new personal checking account at a different bank. I took photographs of every financial document in the house. Tax returns, mortgage statements, his business account records. I saved everything to a cloud account he didn't know existed. I went about my life like nothing had changed. My husband was attentive that week, almost sweet. He brought me coffee in the mornings. He asked about my work. He laughed at my jokes. My sister texted me 3 times. Normal texts. How are you? Did you watch that show? Can I borrow your black cardigan? I responded to all of them, warmly, like everything was fine. I was watching both of them. Then came the Sunday morning conversation. We were having breakfast, eggs and toast, the paper on the table, coffee going cold, and my husband set down his fork and looked at me with an expression I can only describe as rehearsed sincerity. The kind of face someone makes when they've practiced in the mirror. "I've been thinking," he said. "We should really consolidate some things. Financially, it would make everything simpler." I looked up from my coffee. "I mean our accounts," he said. "Your personal account, the investment stuff. If something ever happened to one of us, it would be easier to access everything from one place." I kept my face neutral. "Makes sense," I said. "What were you thinking?" He pulled out his phone, turned it toward me. He'd already done some research. He had a setup in mind. Everything moved into a joint account that I noticed immediately was weighted toward his name as the primary holder. "I'd want to talk to my financial advisor first," I told him, "just to make sure we're doing it right." He nodded. "Of course, obviously. No rush." But his jaw was slightly tight when he said it, and he checked his phone 3 times in the next 10 minutes, which he did when he was anxious. "I called Patricia that afternoon. He's trying to get access to your assets before he files," she said. Not even hesitating. "I know," I said. "You've already moved everything?" "Last week." There was a pause. Then she said, "Good girl." 3 days later, my husband sat me down in the living room with what I can only describe as the face of a man who has convinced himself he is being reasonable. He said he thought we had grown apart. He said he cared about me but wasn't in love with me anymore. He said he thought it was better to end things now before they got worse. He was kind about it. Measured, like he was delivering a performance review. I didn't cry. I looked at him and I said, "I know about her." He went very still. "I'm not angry," I said, which was a lie, but a useful one. "I just want this to be clean." He didn't confirm anything. He didn't deny anything either. He just nodded slowly and said he thought that was the right approach. 4 days after that, I was served. The petition came on a Thursday morning. I read through the financial demands carefully, the way Patricia had taught me. He was claiming half the investment account, half the equity in the house. He was also claiming that I had improperly commingled separate and marital assets, language that Patricia told me later someone had clearly coached him on. My sister texted me that afternoon. Just a little heart emoji. Like she had no idea what was happening. Like she wasn't the reason it was. I didn't respond. Patricia reviewed the petition and called me that evening. "He's going to be very surprised," she said. "The investment account is fully protected. The trust was established before the petition date. He has no claim." "What about the house? That's legitimate marital property, but we can negotiate. He doesn't have the leverage he thinks he has." I slept better that night than I had in weeks. What I did not expect was what came next. I had prepared for the financial fight. I had not fully prepared for what he was willing to do to win it. It started at work. My manager called me into her office on a Monday morning with an expression that told me the conversation was going to be uncomfortable before she said a word. She slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a printed email sent anonymously to HR, claiming that I had been misappropriating client funds, that I had been directing payments into personal accounts, that I had been doing this for over a year. I read it twice. Then I looked up at my manager and said very calmly, "This is not true." "I know," she said, "but I have to document that we addressed it." I went straight from her office to Patricia's. "He's trying to destabilize you," Patricia said. "Make you panic, make you settle fast and take less just to make it stop. Can we go after him for this? If we can prove he sent it. And even if we can't prove it definitively, we can use it to establish a pattern of bad faith." I thought about my sister. I thought about the dinner receipt and the lipstick and the way they had looked at the top of the stairs. I thought about how many times in my life I had protected her from things, covered for her, showed up for her. I was done covering. I hired a forensic email analyst. Patricia referred me to someone she trusted. Within 2 weeks, he had traced the anonymous email to an IP address. It was registered to a coffee shop 2 blocks from my husband's office. The timestamp on the email matched a day I could confirm through calendar records that my husband had been in that area. It wasn't airtight, but it was enough. Patricia drafted a cease and desist letter. She also contacted opposing counsel and made very clear that we were tracking every move and documenting everything. The anonymous emails stopped. My sister, during all of this, tried to reach me twice, once by text, once by showing up at my door on a Wednesday evening with a bottle of wine and an expression that suggested she genuinely believed we could have a normal conversation. I opened the door and looked at her for a long moment. "I can't do this right now," I said. "Zoe, I need you to understand. I know what you need," I said. "I'm just not able to give it to you." I closed the door. She stood on the porch for a few minutes. I could see her through the side window. And then she left. That was the last time I let her get close enough to explain. What broke the case wide open wasn't the email, it was the document. 3 weeks before we were scheduled for our first court appearance, Patricia called me with a note of tension in her voice I hadn't heard before. "He's filed a motion," she said. "He's claiming you transferred the investment assets during the marriage, which would make them subject to equitable distribution. He's submitted documentation." "What documentation?" "Transaction records, dates, amounts." She paused. "The problem is, some of these dates don't match anything in your actual records. Because they're fabricated," I said. "That's what I'm thinking. I need you to come in." I sat across from Patricia the next morning and we went to every line together. He had submitted what appeared to be transfer records showing that I had moved money out of a joint account, an account that, according to his documents, had held shared assets over the course of 14 months. The account number in his documents did not match any account I had ever held. I stared at that number for a long time. Patricia looked at me. "You've never had an account with this number?" "No." I pulled out my records, every statement going back 4 years. "This account doesn't exist." Patricia was already reaching for her phone. She called the forensic financial analyst. She also called a contact at the bank, named in the documents. It took less than 48 hours to get confirmation. The account number in my husband's submitted evidence had never been issued to me. It had, in fact, never been issued to anyone at that branch. The account, for all practical purposes, did not exist. He had fabricated evidence and submitted it to the court. I remember sitting in Patricia's office when she told me the confirmation had come through. I remember the way the afternoon light was coming through the blinds, laying strips of gold across her desk. I remember thinking, this is it. This is the moment. Everything turns. Patricia set down her phone and looked at me with the steady expression of someone who has been in this business long enough to know when a case has shifted. "We're not just defending you anymore," she said. "We're going on offense. We filed a motion to dismiss his claims with prejudice. We submitted the bank's written confirmation that the account in his evidence did not exist. Patricia filed a separate motion for sanctions against him and his attorney for the submission of fabricated documents. We also, and this was the part I had been waiting for, submitted a formal complaint for defamation related to the anonymous workplace email, now traced to his location. My husband was a man who had spent his entire adult life being the smartest person in the room. He was good at strategy. He was patient. He was careful. But he had made 2 mistakes. He had underestimated me, and he had made his moves alone without anyone checking his work. The court date was on a Tuesday. I wore the gray blazer I'd bought for my first real job interview. I arrived early. Patricia was already there, her binder organized, her expression the calm of someone who knows exactly what they have. My husband arrived with his attorney. He looked at me once across the room and then looked away. My sister was not there. I had wondered if she would be. His attorney spoke first. He made the case for equitable distribution of the investment assets, citing the transfer records my husband had provided. Patricia stood up. "Your Honor," she said, "the account referenced in opposing counsel's transfer documentation does not exist. We've written confirmation from the issuing bank that this account number has never been assigned to any customer, at any branch, at any point in time." She slid the confirmation across to the clerk. "What my client's husband has submitted to this court is a fabricated document. We are requesting immediate dismissal of his claims and sanctions for the submission of false evidence." The judge looked at the confirmation, then at my husband's attorney, then at my husband. My husband's jaw was set. He was still trying to look calm. His attorney requested a recess. During the recess, I sat with Patricia in the hallway and drank a bottle of water and didn't say very much. When we went back in, opposing counsel announced that their client wished to withdraw the contested financial claims. The judge accepted the withdrawal, and then, methodically, went through the rest. The sanctions motion was taken under advisement. The workplace defamation complaint was noted for civil proceedings. The dismissal of his financial claims meant the only remaining issue was the house, legitimate marital property, and something Patricia had already negotiated a clean split on in the weeks prior, once it was clear he had nothing to fight with. He got his half of the house equity. Nothing else. Not the investment account, not the trust, not the assets I had built before him and protected during him. His defamation claim from the anonymous email was now a liability for him, not a weapon. Outside the courthouse, he passed close enough that I could have said something. I didn't. I had nothing left to say to him. I called my mother from the parking lot. She answered on the second ring. "It's over," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "Then, are you okay?" "Not yet," I said. "But I'm going to be." That was honest. The aftermath of something like this isn't clean. You don't walk out of a courthouse and feel like yourself again immediately. You feel hollow for a while. You feel angry in waves. You wake up at 3 in the morning and lie there cataloging every moment you missed, every sign you rationalized away, every time you told yourself you were overthinking it. The hardest part wasn't the divorce. It was my sister. My mother called me 2 weeks after the settlement. She said my sister had been calling her, crying, wanting to explain. My mother asked me what I wanted her to say. "Tell her I need time," I said. That was 6 months ago. I'm still deciding how much time I need. Here's what I know now that I didn't know then. The people who love you are not always the people you expect. My mother, who had quietly told me 20 years ago to always keep my own account, had given me the one piece of advice that protected me when everything else fell apart. Patricia, a woman I had met twice before any of this happened, showed up for me with a steadiness I still think about. A colleague who recommended her. A forensic analyst who worked fast and was thorough and didn't waste a single day. The people on the other side had each other. They had months of planning. They had, apparently, a willingness to fabricate legal documents in a federal proceeding. What they didn't have was a woman who had already quietly moved everything out of reach. I'm 30 now. I live alone in an apartment that feels more like mine every single week. I have my investment account, my salary, the equity from the house that I've put into savings. I have a small succulent on my windowsill that I have somehow kept alive for 7 months, which feels like evidence of growth. I don't date yet. I'm not in a hurry. I'm learning to trust my instincts again. The ones that told me something was wrong the moment I found that receipt. The ones I spent weeks second-guessing because I didn't want to believe it. My instincts were right. They were right from the very first night. If you're watching this and something in you is telling you that something is off, that the person next to you is not being honest, that something in your financial life doesn't add up, that the person you trusted most is hiding something, please do not wait. Do not talk yourself out of it. Do not wait for proof so airtight that ignoring it would be impossible. Trust the receipt. Trust the lipstick on the mug. Trust the feeling in the hallway when two people look at you and something behind their eyes is not quite right. You are not paranoid. You are paying attention. Get a lawyer. Know your rights. Protect what's yours before someone else decides you don't deserve it. I moved first, and that made all the difference. If this story hit close to home, drop a 1 in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, who needs to be reminded that they are stronger and smarter than the people trying to underestimate them, share this with them. Stay smart, stay steady, and don't let anyone take what you built. I've thought a lot about what actually caused all of this to unravel the way it did. Not my husband's plan, the unraveling of his plan, because it didn't fall apart by accident. It fell apart because of choices, his choices and mine. He chose to fabricate a document. That was the moment everything shifted from a messy divorce into something he couldn't recover from. Up to that point, he had leverage. Not much, but some. The house was real. The joint account was real. He could have walked away with something fair. Instead, he got greedy. He decided that wasn't enough, that he needed to reach for what wasn't his. And in doing that, He handed me the one thing I needed most, proof of exactly who he was. I used to think betrayal was about the person who betrayed you. Now I think it's more about what you do in the hours after you find out. That's where character actually lives. Not in the big dramatic moments, not in the courtroom, not in the confrontation, but in the quiet Tuesday morning when you're standing at the sink and you know the truth and you have to decide what kind of person you're going to be about it. I chose not to react. That was the hardest thing I've ever done. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to confront them both, to say out loud what I knew, to make them feel the weight of what they were doing. And I didn't. I made coffee. I answered texts. I smiled at the right moments. And underneath all of that, I was building something solid and quiet that they never saw coming. That discipline, the decision to think before I acted, is the only reason I walked out of that courthouse with anything. Intelligence isn't just about being smart. It's about knowing when to be still, knowing that your next move matters more than your last emotion. My mother had told me years ago to keep my own account. I had listened half-heartedly, the way you listen to advice you don't think you'll need. Turns out she was the wisest person in my life, and I almost didn't act on it in time. I think about that now whenever I'm tempted to dismiss something as unlikely. Unlikely things happen every day. The question is whether you've prepared for them. What my husband and my sister did was a choice. A series of choices, made over months, each one compounding the last. And the consequences that came, the withdrawal in the courtroom, the sanctions motion, the settlement where he walked away with nothing but his half of the house, those weren't punishment handed down from somewhere. They were the natural end of a road he built himself. You can fabricate a document, but you can't fabricate an account number that never existed. Reality has a way of not cooperating with lies. I'm not the same person I was the morning I found that receipt. I'm more careful now, and I'm okay with that. I trust differently. I verify more. I keep my own records and I know exactly where my money is at all times. Some people might call that sad. I call it the thing that saved me. If there is one thing I hope stays with you after this, it's that preparation is not pessimism. Knowing your rights is not a sign that you expect the worst. It's a sign that you respect yourself enough to be ready. Protect what you built. Pay attention to what doesn't add up. And when something in you says something is wrong here, listen to it. That voice is not paranoia. That voice is intelligence. Trust it.